This game is a sequel to a game that I was familiar with, but I wasn't sure that the sequel existed when I was showing it. And I was shown it originally by my friend Josh, and when I was showing it I decided that I really want that game, and boy am I glad that I went and got it. I have sometimes heard this game being referred to as Sony's answer to Zelda, which I don't understand the comparison at all, but this game is Dark Chronicle. Yeah, this game was called Dark Cloud 2 in the US because it's a sequel to Dark Cloud, and I was familiar with Dark Cloud, but I played this game and still had an absolute great time with it. So allow me to describe the core mechanics of the game. There are basically different types of modes that you can play through. I don't mean like you start the game and you select a mode, but rather that depending on where you are in the game will change how the game runs. So, for example, you have the towns and you have the dungeons. The dungeons are basically where all the enemies are, and the dungeons are organised through the series of randomly generated floors. That being said, the random generation also takes into account the different type of area that you're at. So, for example, if you are near the beach, the levels are always going to have an inside cave and a big open outside beachy part to it. But each level has a basic goal, which is to defeat the enemy that holds the key to the exit and then make it to the exit. And you're never actually told which enemy has the key to the exit, you just have to find it. But there are also different items and stuff that you can find scattered around. Now, you don't actually level up in this game, but rather your weapons do. When you defeat an enemy using either the short range or long range weapon, then the enemy will drop ABS. ABS basically being the name for experience in this game, and that will go towards the health of that weapon. And so weapons basically need to be repaired every so often. So like if you swing a sword with Monica and you hit an enemy, that will take up some of its health, and you will want to repair it when you have enough recovery powder to do that with. But also leveling up weapons will also allow you to synthesize onto them, and the way that synthesis works is that in your inventory you can synthesize items, or might be called spectrumize, I don't remember, but basically you turn them into a sort of ghostly, sparkly version of itself, and then you can use that to put that onto the weapon to boost certain stats, mostly different types of elements, which also costs points that you get by leveling up the weapon. So there is that element of customization there. And you will also find things like coins that when you spectrumize them and you put them on weapons, it will add an extra sort of ability to them. So it might be like ABS bonus, for example. Each level inside the dungeon also has its own associated goals with it, and so if you complete these goals you will get a medal. And some of the goals can be things such as defeat all enemies only using your long-range weapon. And then you'll have the extra ones which cover the mini-games, such as the fishing, where you'll have to catch a certain size fish, and fishing has its own leveling system as well. And you also get this game called Sfida, which is basically like golf, apart from you have to shoot the ball into a portal whilst hitting it against walls to change its colour so that you can get it the right colour that you need it to be in order for it to make it into the portal. You also have an extra character that you can take with you aside from the main two characters, and this extra character will have their own abilities to affect the game in some way. So for example, you have this chef who can bake bread for you so that you can heal, and Cedric will be able to fix up Steve being this machine that Max can use, and also has its own leveling system. But aside from that, when you go out of the dungeon and you look at the different towns, the main town, Palm Brinks, has you going around and recruiting different characters to take with you on your journey, and you also can take a lot of photos there as well, because there is this whole building system where you can take photos of things to get ideas for building certain things, and so it's kind of like a strange sort of collection type mechanic. But most of the towns operate in terms of you having to rebuild them, because it's a time traveling game, so you need to rebuild towns in the present so that in the future you will have all these advanced towns and different creatures there that you will need. And also with the different characters that you can recruit, you can also put them into these new towns, and there will be specific specifications such as you need a house next to a river in order to unlock this particular thing. And in the case of one of the towns, there are 4 different platforms that you need to keep balanced, so you can't put too much weight on one side and then leave the others. It's a very interesting game and I had a lot of fun with it. This is a very special game for me. This is a game that I got early on, and it's a game that I have played many times over the years, and I have always held this game in very, very high regards. Now, there's often a debate about whether or not you want to include this as a game, and I would say definitely yes, and I'm just going to cut right to the chase here so that you can make sense of what I'm talking about. I am talking about Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Now, the story behind this game is that when they made Sonic 3, there was content that they didn't have time to make, and so they just released it with less content. And what eventually happened was that they released the separate cartridge of Sonic and Knuckles, which has its own lock-on feature that you can put other Sonic games on top of and change them around a bit. So for example, if you did this with Sonic 1, you get the blue sphere. If you did this with Sonic 2, you would get Knuckles in Sonic 2, which is basically a variation of Sonic 2, but you play as Knuckles. And I probably should have mentioned that when I was talking about Sonic 2, and I would kind of blend those together to say that I would include Knuckles in Sonic 2 as a sort of extension of Sonic 2 and not as a separate game. But I think when you put Sonic 3 in there and you get Sonic 3 and Knuckles, then it's a different story. See, here's the main difference. It's Knuckles in Sonic 2, that is to say that it is Sonic 2 with the character of Knuckles, but with Sonic 3, it's Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which means it's the combination of the two games. And it is often seen as a combination of two games, but really it's greater than the combination of two games. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 has some features such as a saving system, and you have the 6 Chaos Emeralds and you have 6 levels to go through. Sonic and Knuckles, you have Sonic and Knuckles to play as, you don't have Tails, you don't have a saving system, you have the Chaos Emeralds, and you have a bunch of levels to go through. The difference here is that with Sonic 3 and Knuckles, you not only get all of the characters and all of the levels, you also get different combinations and different instances that crop up, as well as the additional Master Emeralds that you can get in the second half of the game. The main difference here is that Knuckles as a character is essentially different from Sonic and Tails. Sonic and Tails are basically just different variations of the same game with slightly different abilities. Sonic can use an air attack where he will temporarily expand his range, but can also utilize the shields in order to bounce with the bubble, do a double jump with the electric shield, and do an air dash with the fire shield. And these shields will always do what they normally do, such as protection from drowning, protection from fire, and protection from electricity. Tails can't use these extra abilities, can't use the bouncing or the dash or the double jump, but Tails can fly temporarily, so that's what differentiates those two. Knuckles is kind of different though, because Knuckles can glide and climb walls, but also Knuckles can break through obstacles that Sonic and Tails can't, and even obstacles that Sonic and Tails have to spin dash through, Knuckles can just walk through and instantly break. But the downside to Knuckles is that Knuckles can't jump as high, and all this leads to the fact that playing Sonic or Tails is different to playing as Knuckles because the level is set up differently. Levels will typically have a Sonic path and a Knuckles path, with Tails going along with the Sonic path. And so Knuckles will encounter different obstacles, and some levels are completely different. Even if we just look at the very first stage in the game, Angel Island, you can see in the background that with Sonic, there is water there, whereas if you're playing as Knuckles, there is no water in the background, and this hints at the chronology of the story of the game, which is very interesting. But aside from going to different paths and all that, Knuckles will also face against different bosses. and instead of fighting Dr. Robotnik, Knuckles will fight the Egg Robo, and the bosses are mostly the same, including the mini-bosses, but with some extra slight variation to it to make it slightly harder, and in a lot of these cases it takes a bit of figuring out to notice how the Knuckles variation is actually harder, and sometimes it's harder not because of any differences in the boss, but just in the differences in Knuckles' own abilities. For example, the Act 2 of Sandopolis, the boss is exactly the same, but it's more difficult with Knuckles because Knuckles has to jump on the arm in order to be able to reach the top bit where you hit the boss, whereas Sonic and Tails don't have to do that. But there are also differences such as in the Flying Battery Act 2 boss, where Dr. Robotnik as Sonic and Tails will only shoot the fire when you are jumping above him. The Knuckles variation will constantly do it on a timer, and the Knuckles variation will also only spin around twice, whereas the Sonic and Tails variation will spin around 4 times. And it's such a very interesting exercise to be able to go through each of the bosses and notice the subtle differences between each of those bosses. And I will give another example. The Act 2 boss of Mushroom Hill, Sonic and Tails will have to jump through these gates where there's these rows of spiked balls, but Knuckles will sometimes have them where there's 2 rows instead of just the one. And the Ice Cap Act 2 boss will drop and lower the platform constantly. But another example is the Act 1 boss of Ice Cap Zone, where there isn't any inherent difference to the bosses depending on who you're playing as, but as Knuckles, you won't have as many opportunities to hit it because you can't jump as high. And even slight differences really stand out to me, such as when you're fighting the Act 1 boss of Ice Cap Zone, if you're playing as Knuckles, you fight it indoors, whereas with Sonic, you fight it outdoors. Just little things like that. Although I do have to say that the Marble Garden Zone Act 2, that boss is just completely different depending on who you play as, and Knuckles also skips out on the second act boss of Carnival Night. But you do also see differences between just the regular Sonic 3 game and the regular Sonic and Knuckles game, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles as a whole, such as the Launch Base Act 2 boss, which, if you were to play Sonic 3 as Sonic or Tails, you would get to the final boss of that zone, and then the background would go dark and you would fight the final boss of Sonic 3. But if you're playing Sonic 3 and Knuckles, that final boss of Sonic 3, if you're playing as Sonic and Tails, just isn't there. They skip the final boss of Sonic 3. But if you're playing as Knuckles, you will fight that final boss, but as a regular boss. And once again, the arena is slightly different because you're on a pipe rather than on that platform hanging from that spacecraft. And so it's always really interesting to see the subtle minor differences between each of the different characters and trying to notice all these little tricks that they do. But I am just going to end this, but before I do that I am going to talk about the Super Emeralds, because as we all know, the way the Sonic works is that you get all of the Chaos Emeralds and then you can become Super Sonic. Sonic 3 Knuckles adds the Super Emeralds, and I was amazed in Sonic 2 when I finally got all the Chaos Emeralds, and in this game, when it then gave you the Super Emeralds, I was really shocked. You get all the Chaos Emeralds, Sonic can turn into Super Sonic, Knuckles can turn into Super Knuckles, and there isn't a Super Tails that you can get by collecting all of these Chaos Emeralds. But then, once you go to the second half of the game, you will then get access to the Super Emeralds. And the way that you get those is by once again completing the special stages, but this time you can choose the order of which you do them, and these ones are harder. If you get all of the Super Emeralds as Sonic, you will get the message, Sonic can now become Hyper Sonic. And that just blew my mind, like, wow, it blew my mind when I heard about Super Sonic, but this is Hyper Sonic. And the difference with Hyper Sonic is that as Hyper Sonic, you can do an air dash attack that just kills everything on screen. And again, with Knuckles, if you get all of the Super Emeralds as Knuckles, you get Hyper Knuckles. And Hyper Knuckles can glide into walls, and if he does it fast enough, it will cause an earthquake. That's their gimmick there. But what's also interesting is that you can also, by getting all of the Super Emeralds, unlock Super Tails, which previously didn't have a super form. And Super Tails is just like Super Sonic or Super Knuckles, but with the added bonus of having all of these little flickies that will assist you and just wander off and kill enemies for you. It's very nice. Now, this is a game that is very interesting because, to be honest, when I first heard about this and I saw a trailer for it, I didn't even think it was going to be a game, and don't ask me why that is, but I remember on a DVD I saw the trailer of this game and just thought, what is that? Is that some sort of weird kind of event that's going to happen? But no, it turned out to be a game, and the concept of this game is something that really struck me as strange, and I think it struck a lot of people as strange, and the game in question is the original Kingdom Hearts. This game was marketed as being a crossover between Final Fantasy and Disney, and when they say a crossover of Final Fantasy and Disney, what it turned out that they meant was that it's a Disney game with a few bits of Final Fantasy references splashed here and there. But what really struck me about this game was that it was an action RPG, and this was before I really understood this idea of action RPGs. Because I had played RPGs before this, and the idea that you could have the intricacies of an RPG with the leveling up and the strategy and the customization, and also have this action element where you are using your thumbs to move around and all that in real time was quite a novelty for me. And I always say that I think that the quality of action-based mechanics is vastly overplayed. I think the common consensus that we get these days when people say things like turn-based is outdated, I think they are talking complete rubbish and it's total nonsense. But back when I first played this game, it was quite a novelty to see a game like this because I had never really played a game like that before. And I know a lot of people like to say that Kingdom Hearts 2 is better than Kingdom Hearts 1. I completely disagree with that. I can't see how Kingdom Hearts 2 is in any way better or even comparable to the first one. The second one, it was a lot more about just reacting to things. This game I felt had a really nice flow to it, and I just liked everything about it better than the second one. But the way that it works is that you play as Sora, and you have a very minimalistic type of customization in that at the start you get to choose which weapon you will specialize in, and that will determine which path you will go in your development, which generally I don't like that as a concept. I don't like it in RPGs where you start the game and then it's like, choose your class, choose which thing you want to put your stats into, because I just think that you should play the game first to then get a grasp of what things mean and so you can better strategize. But this game did have that bit of customization at the start, as well as having a bit of hidden customization with your experience system, such as, do you want to start off growing really fast and then slow down? Or do you want to start off slow but then be able to reach the high levels really fast? It had that as well. You basically controlled Sora, but you had your allies in Donald and Goofy, with Donald being the mage character who could do most of the healing, and Goofy was the warrior slash tank who mostly did physical attacks. But as you played through the game, you unlocked different magic spells, and you could also level up those spells by completing certain tasks. So for example, you might have 3 things that will upgrade your arrow spell, and the first one you do will give you the spell arrow, and the second one you do will upgrade it, and then the third one you do will upgrade it to its final top tier. And so you only ever have this very, very limited range of spells, but that's okay. MP was quite strange in this game as well, because not only did you have your flat MP number that you used to cast the spells, you also had individual charge bars. So for example, if you had 3 MP, in order to recover that 4th MP slot you would have to gain 4 MP charge bars full, and some spells didn't cost MP but they cost the charge bars, so by gaining 1 extra MP for your fire spell would actually give you more depending on how much MP you had total. But then something like Cure didn't work like that, it just meant it was more to charge. So that was rather interesting. There is also the gummy ship that you use to transport between different areas, but that's pretty rubbish I think, and I don't think anyone really cares for that. It doesn't really matter anyway, so whatever. But my favourite area in this game is the Colosseum, where you have all of the different combat challenges. Yes, I really like that. You have different cups to compete in, and by completing those cups you are presented with extra challenges. Like, can you complete this particular cup in a time limit, or can you defeat it by just using Sora? And it got very interesting when you got to the Hades Cup, which was 50 stages long, and you unlocked like ultimate weapons and all that sort of stuff for doing those things. And like Kingdom Hearts 2, the game did also have a synthesis system where you could find different materials and use them to create different items, including stat boosting items, so that you could train to max stats if you so pleased, which wasn't really as core to the game design overall as it was with Kingdom Hearts 2, but it was still nice.